The Fall of Rome, a tale told 1,000 times, yet never quite the same. For centuries, scholars, historians, and conspiracy theorists alike have debated the true cause of the empire's collapse. Was it economic decay, military overreach, a slow and inevitable decline, or was something far more sinister at play? Official history tells us Rome fell due to a combination of internal corruption and external invasion. A bloated bureaucracy, a crumbling economy, and the relentless march of the so-called barbarian hordes. These are the usual suspects, but what if the story is not as simple as textbooks would have us believe? What if Rome's fall was not an accident of history, but the result of something orchestrated? A hidden hand pulling the strings from the shadows? The signs were there, ignored by the ruling elite until it was too late. The inexplicable disappearance of entire legions in the Germanic forests, the eerie silence of the Sibylline oracles after centuries of accurate predictions, the strange lights that appeared over the city just before the sack of 410 AD. Were these mere coincidences, or did they point to something deeper, something ancient, perhaps even supernatural? Some whisper that Rome did not collapse, but was sacrificed, that powerful figures within the Senate, men who had long abandoned their belief in Jupiter and Mars, had turned to older, darker forces that demanded the fall of the world's greatest empire as tribute. Could it be that Rome's doom was written not in political treaties or battle strategies, but in blood and shadow? Others speak of a lost manuscript, hidden in the depths of the Vatican archives, that details a secret order operating within Rome's walls, an order that, in its final days, made an unthinkable pact to ensure their survival at the cost of the empire itself. And then there are the even wilder theories, that Rome's fall was not merely the result of human machinations, but intervention from something beyond. That the empire had grown too powerful, too ambitious, and had attracted the wrath of those who had once been worshipped as gods. Could it be that the gods themselves, abandoned and forgotten, turned their backs on Rome, allowing it to crumble into dust? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: the fall of Rome remains one of history's greatest enigmas. A puzzle that refuses to be solved, a mystery that stretches across time, daring us to uncover its darkest secrets. And perhaps, just perhaps, the answers have been right in front of us all along. The last days of glory. The Byzantine emperor in the shadow of doom Rome did not fall in a single day, nor did its legacy vanish overnight. On the ruins of the Western Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call Byzantium, stood defiant. Its rulers still called themselves emperors of Rome, clinging to the illusion that the empire had not truly fallen. But in the marble halls of Constantinople, whispers of doom never ceased. Some say the Byzantine emperors knew more about Rome's fall than they ever admitted, that they had in their possession scrolls and tomes detailing a secret history, a history too dangerous to be revealed. What dark knowledge did they inherit from their fallen counterparts in the West? What truths lay hidden within the imperial archives, only to be burned in mysterious fires that conveniently erased them from history? One particular document, known as the Codex Obscura, was said to contain confessions from the last Roman senators. It spoke of a ritual, a final desperate act performed in the crumbling city of Ravenna, meant to bargain with forces beyond human understanding. The details were vague, but the implications were terrifying. If the Codex ever truly existed, its destruction was no accident. It was a necessity. The Byzantine emperors, particularly Justinian I, seemed haunted by an invisible specter. He embarked on an ambitious campaign to reclaim the lost Western territories, as if trying to undo a cosmic mistake. But fate resisted him at every turn. Plagues, rebellions, economic crises, almost as if some unseen force was punishing his arrogance. There were also rumors of a secret society within the Byzantine court, one that understood what had truly happened to Rome. It is said that deep beneath the Hagia Sophia, tunnels led to a hidden chamber filled with artifacts from the old empire, statues, scrolls, even the last remains of an emperor who had vanished without a trace. Why keep such relics? Did the Byzantines believe they were cursed, or did they hope to one day wield their forgotten power? In 1204, when Constantinople fell to the Crusaders, much of its knowledge was lost forever. Libraries were ransacked, relics stolen, secrets scattered. The Codex Obscura, if it had survived that long, likely perished in the flames. But even today, in the hushed corners of Vatican vaults or in the private collections of those who know too much, some remnants of this forbidden knowledge may still exist. And so, the question lingers, was Rome's fall simply a failure of politics and war? Or was it something else entirely? The Byzantines knew the answer, but they took it to their graves, leaving behind only fragments, riddles, and the eternal specter of an empire that refused to die. Barbarians, or Martians, the mysterious disappearances of Roman legions. The fall of the Roman Empire is filled with strange mysteries, many of which remain unresolved to this day. One of the most unsettling questions historians continue to grapple with is the sudden and unexplained disappearance of entire Roman legions. These were no ordinary armies. These were well-disciplined, battle-hardened forces, feared across the known world. So, how did they simply vanish, without a trace, as the empire teetered on the brink of collapse? The most baffling case occurred in 53 BCE, when the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions were sent to the farthest reaches of the empire, into the heart of Germania. They were tasked with quelling a rising threat from the Germanic tribes. But when their commander, the famed Publius Quinctilius Varus, was expected to return with news of victory, there was nothing. No word, no message, no prisoners, just silence. It was as though the earth itself had swallowed them. When Roman scouts finally arrived at the site where the legions were last seen, they discovered nothing but scattered equipment and blood-soaked soil. The legions had vanished. This is where the story takes a strange turn. Roman historians like Tacitus and Suetonius, though careful in their accounts, recorded curious details that don't quite add up. Some spoke of fire chariots, seen in the skies above the last known camp of the legions, floating, glowing objects almost like modern-day descriptions of UFOs. Others described figures descending from the heavens, soldiers who were said to be struck by a great terror just before their disappearance. What was really happening to those men? Were they lost to enemy forces, or was something far more unsettling at play? Let's dive into the unknown. Could these mysterious disappearances have been the result of something beyond human conflict? A wild yet compelling theory suggests that the Roman legions didn't just vanish into the forests of Germania. They were taken by forces beyond this world. Think about it. Roman soldiers, trained in the art of war, with every advantage at their disposal, suddenly disappearing without a trace. The chilling descriptions from the ancient sources, pointing to strange lights and otherworldly forces, suggest something other than conventional warfare. A controversial theory, though, posits that the legions weren't destroyed by barbarians at all. Some speculate that the Roman Empire, in its desperation to hold on to its power, might have encountered something far darker, perhaps ancient knowledge kept hidden by the highest echelons of Roman society, hinted at extraterrestrial encounters long before such a concept was even on humanity's radar. Could the legions have become victims of an intergalactic experiment, a mere footnote in a much larger cosmic drama? Sure, this sounds fantastical, even impossible. But given the odd references to fire chariots in the sky, coupled with the eerie, sudden disappearances of Rome's most elite forces, could there be a nugget of truth hidden among the bizarre claims? Regardless of the cause, what is clear is that the disappearance of these legions was a turning point. It shattered Rome's myth of invincibility. It wasn't just barbarian forces that the empire had to fear, something more elusive, something outside human comprehension, had entered the scene. The Roman legions, once the world's greatest military machine, vanished, perhaps not into the clutches of barbarian tribes, but into something far more unsettling. Was it an act of war, or something far more supernatural? The truth, buried deep in the annals of time, remains one of history's greatest mysteries. And as history tells us, some questions remain unanswered, suspended in time and space, leaving us with more to ponder than we may ever truly understand. The conspiracy of the senators. Who was threatened by Rome? The fall of the Roman Empire is often seen as the result of barbarian invasions, internal decay, and the eventual weakening of its military. But what if the collapse of one of the greatest empires in history wasn't just the consequence of external forces or time's inevitable march? What if it was the culmination of a long-conceived plot? A conspiracy from within, a conspiracy that included some of the most powerful men in Rome? The theory that the fall of Rome was orchestrated by its own elite remains a dark and unsettling possibility. The conspiracies of the senators, the hoarding of wealth, and the secret societies working in the shadows paint a picture of an empire undone not by forces from without, but by the men who once held its reins. And perhaps, in the end, the greatest betrayal of all wasn't by the barbarians at the gates, but by those who had once sworn to protect the very empire they helped bring to its knees. It's an unsettling thought. The image of senators, the very pillars of Rome's political power, secretly plotting its downfall, is a chilling one. But this theory, though often overshadowed by more conventional explanations, has a surprising amount of evidence to back it up. The idea that the empire's ultimate demise was hastened by a carefully orchestrated coup is not as far-fetched as it might sound. Before we dive into the specifics, let's consider one strange detail that historians have often overlooked: the behavior of Rome's elites in the years leading up to the empire's fall. In the centuries prior to Rome's decline, the patricians, the wealthy and powerful elite, were seen as the guardians of Roman virtue and power. Yet, during the final days of the empire, something changed. Many of these senators, once loyal to the Republic and the empire, began to act in ways that suggested they were preparing for something far beyond mere political maneuvering. One of the most curious examples of this is the widespread accumulation of gold among the ruling class. Historical accounts show that as the empire's stability began to crumble, wealthy senators and patricians started hoarding vast amounts of gold, secretly hiding their wealth in temples and private vaults. Why? Was it merely an instinctive reaction to the empire's slow disintegration, or did they know something more sinister was coming? It's here that the theory of a conspiracy begins to take shape. Could it be that some of Rome's most powerful men had become disillusioned with the empire's leadership, perhaps even plotting its downfall for their own gain? After all, the Roman elite had always been steeped in intrigue, and it's no secret that power struggles were a constant feature of Roman politics. But what if these struggles escalated into a larger, more coordinated effort to bring down the empire from within? The most famous of such conspiracies is, of course, the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. The so-called liberators, a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius, believed they were saving the Republic from Caesar's growing power. But what if their actions were part of a broader hidden agenda, a scheme that went beyond saving the Republic and instead sought to weaken and eventually dismantle the empire itself? There are whispers in historical circles suggesting that the conspiracy wasn't just about preventing one man's rule, but rather about creating a power vacuum, one that could eventually lead to the empire's fall. But the conspiracy didn't end with Caesar's death. Secret societies, long known to operate beneath the surface of Roman politics, may have played a significant role in the further destabilization of the empire. Some historians argue that groups like the Cicada, a mysterious and possibly mythical secret society, may have been involved in orchestrating Rome's collapse. These societies, which were rumored to operate in the shadows of Roman politics, had their own agendas. Could they have been working in concert with the elite senators to manipulate the course of Roman history? There's more. Rome, with its vast network of roads, ports, and legions, was an empire built on control. Control over its people, its armies, and its wealth. But what if the senators knew that this system, which had once been the bedrock of Roman power, was inherently flawed? They had long been aware of the empire's internal divisions, the growing corruption, and the inability of successive emperors to unify Rome's vast territories. Could these elites have seen the writing on the wall and decided that the best course of action was not to save the empire, but to abandon it, leaving it to crumble under its own weight while they secured their own futures? Perhaps it's not so hard to believe that these men, with their wealth and their power, would have seen the decline of the empire as a chance to carve out a new world order. Some even suggest that the elites may have seen the growing influence of Christianity as a useful tool for weakening the empire from within, by fostering division and undermining traditional Roman values. Was this an act of sabotage? A deliberate manipulation of religious and political forces to create chaos and instability? The most disturbing question, however, is whether these conspiracies and hidden agendas extended beyond the death of Caesar or the rise of Christianity. Could the fall of the empire have been the result of long-term plans, years in the making? Were the secrets hidden in those vaults of gold, locked away in the darkened temples, part of a greater scheme to ensure that the empire's collapse would be as controlled and as profitable as possible for a select few? As the empire slowly disintegrated, the senators, once the defenders of Roman greatness, may have been among those who profited most from its collapse. The rise of powerful regional leaders, the eventual fragmentation of the empire, and the rise of new powers could all have been predicted by these elites. What if they knew all along that the end of Rome was inevitable, and that the real power lay not in preserving it, but in ensuring they would survive the collapse? The Curse of the Pharaohs, Ancient Egypt and the Fall of Rome. The Roman Empire, at the height of its power, saw itself as the eternal city, invincible, unyielding, and at the center of the world. But history, as it often does, tells a different story. Rome's fall wasn't simply the result of internal decay or barbarian invasions. For some, there was a deeper, more mysterious force at work, a force tied to the ancient land of Egypt, a land that had once been a source of great wealth and power for Rome. And that force, perhaps it was the vengeful wrath of the pharaohs themselves. Even if one dismisses the idea of a literal curse, the story of Rome's relationship with Egypt remains a striking one. The empire, in its conquest and its greed, may have unwittingly set in motion a series of events that would ultimately lead to its downfall. Whether it was the power of ancient gods, the weight of history, or simply the consequences of greed and hubris, Rome's tragic end may have been as inevitable as the shifting sands of the desert, a culmination of sins against an ancient and powerful civilization that had once been at the heart of the world. And as the final legions of Rome fell, its rulers and citizens could not help but wonder, was it just fate, or had they truly angered the very forces that had shaped the ancient world? The answer, perhaps, is lost to history, but the mystery remains. It's not just a dramatic tale of supernatural vengeance, but a strange series of events that raises unsettling questions about the relationship between Rome and Egypt. In the years before the empire's decline, Rome had looted and desecrated the temples of Egypt, plundering treasures and artifacts that were sacred to the ancient civilization. The plunder of the Egyptian temples, particularly those in Thebes and Alexandria, was more than a mere act of conquest. It was a violation of something much more profound. In 30 BCE, the defeat of Cleopatra and the annexation of Egypt turned the once glorious Egyptian kingdom into a province of Rome. But in doing so, Rome claimed not just Egypt's riches but also its most sacred and mysterious symbols. The obelisks, statues, and scrolls that came from the Nile Valley were not just trophies, they were believed by some to carry powerful curses. And as Rome continued to grow in wealth and power, it continued to gather these relics of Egypt, many of which were said to carry with them the ancient wrath of the pharaohs. But why would the plunder of Egypt's sacred temples lead to the eventual downfall of Rome? Could it really be that a curse had been placed upon the empire, one that followed them through centuries of conquest and greed? While the idea of a literal curse may seem far-fetched, there are some chilling coincidences that suggest something much darker was at play. One of the most intriguing mysteries revolves around the seemingly endless string of misfortunes that plagued Rome after its looting of Egypt. Within a century of the conquest, Rome faced a series of devastating disasters: plagues, civil wars, and widespread instability. Was this mere coincidence, or were these events the result of something more sinister? Perhaps the most striking example is the series of strange omens that occurred after the Roman armies desecrated Egypt's most revered shrines. Ancient texts describe unusual celestial events: comets, strange eclipses, and flashes of light in the night sky that seemed to signal the coming of doom. These were followed by reports of strange diseases that spread like wildfire through the empire, diseases that modern historians cannot fully explain. Some believed that these plagues were more than just biological outbreaks. They were the manifestation of an ancient wrath, set in motion by the gods of Egypt themselves. But it wasn't just the physical calamities that hinted at a curse. The political instability that followed Rome's conquest of Egypt also took on an eerie quality. Civil wars erupted with a frequency that was almost unnatural, as if the empire was being torn apart by unseen hands. Some suggest that the loss of Cleopatra and the subsequent subjugation of Egypt had a profound psychological effect on Rome's rulers, an effect that created an instability within the empire's leadership. The most powerful rulers of the empire, from Augustus to Nero, seemed to fall victim to a strange series of personal tragedies, including deaths by assassination, betrayal, and scandal. Was it simply the inevitable corruption of power, or were these events the result of something far darker, something tied to the ancient land of the pharaohs? In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs were seen as living gods, and their power was believed to extend beyond death. The temples they built and the treasures they amassed were seen as sacred, imbued with divine energy that could protect or curse those who dared to disturb them. To the Egyptians, the desecration of these temples was an unforgivable offense, one that could bring ruin to anyone who dared violate them. The Romans, in their hubris, may have believed that they could steal Egypt's wealth without consequence. But what if they were wrong? Some theorists suggest that the great power of the Egyptian gods was not simply lost in the sands of time, but that it lived on in the relics that were carried off by the Romans. The curses that came with these artifacts may have been a way for the ancient civilization to strike back at those who had desecrated their most sacred sites. Could it be that the gods of Egypt, or the lingering energy of the pharaohs, had placed a long-lasting curse on the Roman Empire, one that only manifested after centuries of accumulation and exploitation? Others have pointed to the strategic role that Egypt played in the Roman Empire's decline. Egypt was a vital source of grain, and as the empire's control over it weakened, so did its strength. The loss of Egypt in the 7th century, coupled with the gradual collapse of its economic and military power, could be seen as the final act in a long cycle of decline that began with the looting of its temples. Was the loss of Egypt the final act of a curse set in motion centuries earlier, when Rome first desecrated its most sacred sites? Mysterious symbols in the catacombs. Was there a secret warning of the end? Beneath the streets of Rome, hidden from the world above, lie miles of dark and eerie catacombs. Underground burial sites where the early Christians once sought refuge from persecution. But these ancient tunnels and chambers hold more than just the remains of the dead. Within their walls, some claimed to have found strange symbols, cryptic messages, and signs that seemed to predict the fall of the greatest empire the world had ever known. Could these symbols have been a secret warning, a message left behind by those who foresaw the eventual collapse of Rome? As the centuries passed and the Roman Empire crumbled, the catacombs became more than just burial sites. They became places of legend and mystery, where history and faith intertwined with the unseen forces of fate. The strange symbols left behind by the early Christians continue to puzzle archaeologists and historians, their meanings forever lost in time. But as we peer into the darkness of those ancient tunnels, perhaps we are looking not just at the past but at the future, a future that the Christians of Rome may have known all too well. In the end, the catacombs remain a silent testament to Rome's demise, an eerie reminder that sometimes the signs of a civilization's fall are not written in history books but carved into the very walls beneath its streets. What they meant, and what they might still mean, is a mystery that continues to haunt us, just as it haunted those who first walked the tunnels of the Roman catacombs. The catacombs, which stretch beneath Rome in a labyrinth of tombs and passageways, are a haunting reminder of the early Christian struggle for survival in an empire that viewed them with suspicion and hostility. These underground cemeteries were places of worship, refuge, and secret meetings where the faithful gathered to pray and share their faith in secrecy. But as much as they were a place for the living, they were also a place where messages from the past were left behind. At first glance, the symbols carved into the walls of the catacombs seem innocent enough. Fish, crosses, and images of the Good Shepherd. These were simple and clear symbols of Christian faith. But hidden among them, researchers and archaeologists have uncovered a number of strange and mysterious markings that seem out of place. Some of these markings appear to be warnings, others are cryptic symbols that don't seem to align with Christian teachings at all. And then there are the more chilling symbols, signs that some believe may have predicted the empire's ultimate downfall. One of the most widely discussed symbols is the X shape, or crux decusata, which appears repeatedly in the catacombs. At first glance, this could be interpreted as just another Christian cross. However, some scholars argue that the repeated use of this symbol, often accompanied by other strange markings, may have had a deeper, more ominous meaning. Was this symbol a reference to the end of an era? A visual representation of the empire's fall, marking the final intersection of Rome's glorious past with its impending collapse. Even more puzzling are the images of the sacrificial lamb, which appear in several catacombs but often with unusual additions. Lambs surrounded by flames, for example, or being dragged by invisible hands. While the lamb is a traditional Christian symbol of Christ, these odd variations raise questions. Was this a symbol of sacrifice for the greater good, or a warning that Rome itself, like the lamb, would eventually be led to its own sacrifice? Could these images have been an artistic foreshadowing of the empire's eventual destruction, portraying Rome as a city bound to fall, led unknowingly to its doom? Then there are the more abstract symbols, spirals, circles, and geometric patterns that appear throughout the catacombs, some of which have never been fully understood. These markings don't appear to be directly connected to Christian doctrine, yet they are often found alongside Christian imagery. The spirals in particular have raised eyebrows among historians and conspiracy theorists alike. The spiral, in many cultures, is a symbol of transformation and decay, a journey from one state of being to another. Could these spirals have been symbolic of the slow, inevitable decay of Rome? Was this a visual representation of the empire's transition from greatness to ruin? Perhaps most intriguing of all are the mysterious eyes found etched into the stone walls of certain catacombs. These strange symbols, often placed near the tombs of martyrs, depict wide, unblinking eyes staring out from the darkness. In many cultures, eyes are symbols of vigilance and foresight, suggesting that those who created these markings had some knowledge of what was to come. Some theorists have suggested that these eyes were not just an artistic choice, but rather a cryptic message from the early Christians, a warning to those who would come after them. Were these early followers of Christ somehow aware of the fate that awaited the Roman Empire? Did they leave these signs to warn future generations of the fall of the very civilization that persecuted them? There are also those who believe that these symbols may not have been about Rome at all, but rather a secret message directed at future conquerors, perhaps even those who would later lay siege to the city. The rise of the Germanic tribes and the eventual collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE could have been anticipated by the early Christians who had been living through their own version of decline and destruction. Could these symbols have been a way to communicate to the future conquerors, telling them that the empire was already dead in spirit even before it fell? The idea that early Christians foresaw the fall of Rome, even as the empire seemed unstoppable, is both thrilling and unsettling. Could the catacombs, those dark and sacred places of death, have been a sanctuary not only for the bodies of the martyrs, but also for secret knowledge about the future of Rome? Were these early Christians tapping into some kind of divine foresight, or were they merely expressing their fears and hopes through symbols that would only make sense centuries later? The destruction of Pompeii. Omen or experiment? On August 24, 79 AD, the world changed forever, as Mount Vesuvius erupted in a violent explosion that buried the thriving Roman city of Pompeii. A series of strange and unexplained phenomena occurred in the sky above. Fireballs streaking across the heavens were witnessed by those who survived, and to this day, no one can explain exactly what they were. Was this a sign, a cosmic omen foretelling the doom of a great city? Or could it have been something far more chilling? Perhaps a sinister experiment gone horribly wrong. As the ruins of Pompeii continue to be uncovered, the questions surrounding the eruption of Vesuvius remain unanswered. Could the ancient city have been the site of an early experiment in chemical warfare? Was the fiery spectacle in the sky a signal of impending doom, or the result of a disastrous technological failure? These mysteries continue to captivate the imagination of historians, scientists, and conspiracy theorists alike, leaving us to wonder, what really happened to Pompeii? And what other secrets are buried beneath the ashes of its destruction? The eruption of Vesuvius is often painted as a tragic natural disaster. The city was swallowed by molten lava and ash, freezing its people in time, preserving the moment of their demise in stunning detail for centuries. But there's something almost supernatural about the way Pompeii met its end. Those strange fireballs reported by witnesses before the eruption still stir the imagination. Ancient texts tell of fiery stones falling from the sky, of shooting stars that ignited the night. Could this have been a natural phenomenon, or was it something far more deliberate? The fireballs reported by survivors of Pompeii weren't just fleeting glimpses of falling stars. They were described as massive and fiery, casting an eerie glow over the land, leading some to believe that these strange occurrences were the work of an otherworldly force. Some have even suggested that they could have been part of an ancient warning system, a sign sent by the gods to foretell the coming destruction. However, for others, the fireballs raise a far more unsettling question. Could these mysterious flames have been the result of something man-made, something even more dangerous than nature's wrath? In the years following the eruption, an alarming theory began to circulate among scientists and conspiracy theorists alike. What if Pompeii was not merely destroyed by a natural disaster, but by an experiment gone horribly wrong? While this theory has yet to be proven, there are elements that continue to fuel the speculation. First, there's the discovery of strange chemical residues in the layers of volcanic ash that buried the city. Archaeologists and geologists studying the volcanic deposits found traces of substances not typically associated with natural eruptions, such as sulfur compounds and unusual metal alloys. Some have suggested that these unusual findings point to something more than just the eruption of Vesuvius. Could these chemical residues indicate the use of chemical weapons, or perhaps a secret experiment by the Romans themselves? The idea of experiments in ancient times may seem far-fetched, but the Romans were no strangers to pushing the boundaries of technology and science. They were known for their engineering marvels, from aqueducts to complex military tactics, and the possibility that they might have been involved in some form of experimentation is not as outlandish as it may first appear. Some believe that Pompeii was the site of an unspoken scientific experiment, a test of a newly developed weapon, or even an early attempt at harnessing volcanic energy for military purposes. The mysterious fireballs in the sky could have been the result of a catastrophic misfire of this ancient experiment, with the eruption of Vesuvius merely the collateral damage. This theory gains traction when you consider the Roman Empire's advanced understanding of chemistry and warfare. By the 1st century AD, the Romans had begun experimenting with a variety of chemical compounds for use in weapons of war. Could they have developed early forms of chemical warfare, unaware of the devastating effects they might have had? Were the fireballs in the sky not a natural phenomenon, but the result of chemical reactions or explosives gone wrong? Of course, there is no definitive proof to support this theory. However, the evidence that continues to surface about the destruction of Pompeii challenges the notion that the event was purely the result of a random natural disaster. The preserved bodies of Pompeii's victims are not simply frozen in time. They reveal unusual patterns of death. Some of the victims were found with their bodies contorted in strange ways, their faces frozen in expressions of sheer terror, as if they had been caught in an intense chemical reaction. In other cases, victims were found with unusual burns or traces of chemicals on their skin, suggesting that their deaths were caused by something other than molten lava. So, what does this all mean? Is it possible that the destruction of Pompeii was not just a random act of nature, but a carefully orchestrated experiment that spiraled out of control? Was the eruption of Mount Vesuvius a natural event that was manipulated or even triggered by human intervention? The eerie fireballs, the strange chemical residues, and the bizarre patterns of death all raise questions that have yet to be answered. Whether Pompeii was destroyed by an experiment gone wrong, or whether the fireballs were merely a sign of a greater cosmic force at work, the tragedy of the city is undeniable. What happened to Pompeii serves as a reminder of the fragile nature of human existence and the unpredictable forces that govern our world. The fireballs in the sky might have been an omen, or they might have been something far more sinister, an experiment that pushed the limits of human understanding and met with catastrophic consequences. Teutonic sorcery, barbarians who should have never won. In the early centuries of the Roman Empire, the walls of Rome seemed impenetrable, its legions unstoppable, and its dominance over the known world assured. Yet, time and time again, the Romans found themselves facing a force they could not quite understand. Barbarian tribes from the north, tribes who, on paper, should never have had a chance. These warriors lacked the military discipline, advanced weaponry, and engineering expertise of the Romans. And yet, against all odds, they managed to shatter the empire's defenses, toppling fortresses and laying waste to Roman legions with an almost supernatural ferocity. While there is no concrete evidence to support the theory that Teutonic tribes wielded ancient sorcery, the eerie coincidences and strange reports surrounding their victories have continued to spark debate. Some believe that the key to their success lies not just in superior tactics or courage, but in an unknown, possibly mystical power that gave them the upper hand. Could the Romans have been outwitted, not by mere brute force, but by an enemy who understood the world in a completely different way, an enemy whose strength lay not in weapons but in the very forces of nature itself. The collapse of the Roman Empire came not just from the invasion of these so-called barbarians, but from a deeper, more profound misunderstanding. In their arrogance, the Romans may have failed to see the true nature of the threat. They thought they were fighting mere warriors. They never suspected they were up against something much older, much more primal, and far more powerful than they could ever imagine. How could this happen? How could armies of seemingly untrained, unorganized warriors defeat the most powerful empire the world had ever seen? The answer, according to some theories, may lie in something far more mysterious than mere brute strength or luck. Could these barbarians have possessed secret knowledge, ancient rituals, mystical powers, or forgotten sorcery that gave them the edge over Rome? When the Teutonic tribes, including the Goths, Vandals, and Franks, began their raids into Roman territory, the Romans were taken by surprise. These tribes, often depicted in Roman accounts as primitive and chaotic, seemed to possess an uncanny ability to outmaneuver the Romans on the battlefield. Roman military strategies and fortifications, built over centuries of warfare and expansion, were suddenly ineffective against these unconventional attackers. How could it be that these so-called barbarians could breach the walls of Rome and bring the empire to its knees? Some historians suggest that the success of these tribes was not entirely due to their combat prowess, but rather their mastery of ancient, forgotten knowledge. In particular, there are those who argue that the Teutonic tribes, especially the Goths, had access to the deep mystical teachings of the Druids. While Druids are often associated with Celtic culture, their influence stretched far beyond the British Isles, reaching into the forests of northern Europe, where they passed on a secret tradition of magic, divination, and spiritual power. According to some legends, the Druids were not merely religious figures, but also powerful sorcerers who possessed a profound understanding of the natural world, including the ability to manipulate the elements and harness the unseen forces of nature. It is believed that their teachings included rituals that could summon storms, confuse enemies, or even influence the minds of those around them. What if these Druids, or their descendants, had passed on their knowledge to the northern tribes? Could they have used this knowledge to gain an advantage over the Roman legions? Evidence for this theory remains largely speculative, but there are strange accounts from Roman historians that hint at something beyond mere combat skills. One of the most puzzling aspects of the barbarian victories is their apparent ability to predict Roman movements and strike at precisely the right moments. Some Roman generals reported a sense of eerie foreboding before battles with the tribes, as if the very air was charged with a strange energy. Could these tribes have been using ancient Druidic rituals to gain insights into Roman strategies, or to influence the outcomes of battles? Could they have been calling upon nature itself, using its forces as weapons? Moreover, there are accounts of Teutonic warriors who seem to possess an unnatural resilience. In battle, they would fight with an intensity and tenacity that seemed beyond human limits, often appearing impervious to the wounds that would normally fell an ordinary soldier. Some Roman soldiers spoke of the barbarian warriors being enchanted, as though they were under the influence of some magical force. Roman records also mention strange phenomena surrounding these tribes: unexplained flashes of light, eerie noises in the forests, and inexplicable occurrences during the height of battles. Could this have been the work of ancient magic, passed down through generations of Druids, or were these just the exaggerated tales of frightened soldiers? In addition to these mysterious elements, there is the role of the sacred sites of the Teutonic tribes. Many of these tribes worshipped gods tied closely to nature, gods of the forest, the river, the wind, and the storm. Could their connection to these forces have given them the strength and courage to resist the might of Rome? Some theorists argue that the barbarians' ability to command these natural forces made them appear invincible to the Romans, who had little understanding of the rituals and practices that powered these mysterious practices. One of the most famous defeats of Rome at the hands of the so-called barbarians occurred at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. 3 Roman legions were annihilated by a coalition of Germanic tribes led by the chieftain Arminius. Roman sources describe the battle as a catastrophic surprise attack, with the legions being caught in a seemingly impossible situation. The forest itself, dense and treacherous, seemed to turn against the Romans, trapping them in a deathly ambush. The outcome was so shocking that it left a lasting scar on the Roman psyche. Could there have been more to this defeat than military strategy? Did the tribes, with their knowledge of ancient rites and their connection to the earth, have an advantage that the Romans simply couldn't comprehend? The sudden cold. Ancient climate weapon? As the Roman Empire reached the height of its power, the empire's stability and prosperity seemed as unshakable as the walls of its grand cities. But as the empire began to fragment and weaken, something mysterious and almost apocalyptic began to unfold, an event that historians have long debated and that seems to have played a role in Rome's eventual collapse. The temperature across Europe and the Mediterranean started to drop dramatically. A sudden, inexplicable cold descended over the empire, and with it came a host of problems that were difficult for the Romans to explain. Could the fall of Rome have been influenced not just by barbarians at the gates, but by something far more sinister, something as grand and unfathomable as a weapon capable of controlling the very climate itself? The 6th century, specifically the time around the fall of the Western Roman Empire, was marked by what is now referred to as the Late Antique Little Ice Age, a period during which temperatures across the northern hemisphere began to dip significantly. This period of cooling was so abrupt and so dramatic that it caused major disruptions to agriculture, trade, and the economy, core pillars of Rome's vast empire. What was once a prosperous Mediterranean climate began to give way to long winters, shorter growing seasons, and devastating crop failures. Could such a drastic change in the climate have been a natural event? Or was there something more at play? Could someone have been manipulating the weather to bring about the downfall of one of the most powerful civilizations the world had ever known? Some modern-day theorists propose that the Romans, like many ancient civilizations, might have been unaware of the potential power of climate manipulation. But what if others, perhaps the elites or shadowy groups with ancient knowledge, had already figured out how to harness and weaponize the forces of nature? The concept of weather manipulation is not new. Throughout history, there have been numerous rumors and legends about ancient civilizations possessing the ability to control the weather, often through elaborate rituals, divine intervention, or technologies that were far beyond their time. Could such a power have been used to weaken the Romans at the most critical juncture in their history? One theory suggests that certain factions within the Roman Empire might have been aware of techniques to affect local weather patterns. Ancient texts and writings from civilizations in the Middle East and the Far East describe advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and natural forces, skills that, when combined, could have been used to influence the environment. In particular, certain mysterious rites practiced by secret societies or powerful groups within Rome might have involved the use of sacred sites, alignment with celestial events, and deep knowledge of the natural world. This has led some historians to speculate that the climate changes in the later years of Rome's existence were not merely the result of natural fluctuations but were influenced by targeted, possibly even weaponized, manipulation of the atmosphere. Could the sudden cooling have been a form of climate warfare, something that was deliberately used to weaken Rome at a time when the empire was already fragile? After all, Rome was beset on all sides by enemies, internal strife, and economic collapse. A prolonged series of harsh winters and crop failures would have been catastrophic for an empire that depended so heavily on its agricultural base. There are ancient accounts of rulers and military leaders invoking the gods to help them win battles, praying for favorable weather or trying to influence the winds to carry their ships into battle. These ancient practices suggest that, to some degree, the Romans recognized the power of the elements and were already trying to manipulate them for their own benefit. Could an opposing force have used this same knowledge to create the perfect storm, both figuratively and literally? Some historians even point to unusual events that occurred during the cooling period, such as the mysterious eruptions of volcanoes in the Mediterranean region. These eruptions caused a significant amount of ash to be released into the atmosphere, leading to what is known as volcanic winter, a phenomenon that could drastically lower global temperatures for years. The question arises, could some of these eruptions have been intentionally triggered as part of a larger scheme to destabilize Rome? While this theory is speculative, the fact remains that such eruptions, which were often followed by extreme weather changes, played a significant role in the environment during Rome's decline. Was it just coincidence, or was there a darker hand at work? Adding to the mystery are the accounts of strange weather patterns and unnatural phenomena that seem to have accompanied the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Some chronicles describe unexplained storms, unusual weather patterns, and mysterious fogs that obscured military movements. Were these events the result of natural forces, or could they have been orchestrated by those who sought to bring about Rome's fall? Could someone have harnessed the power of the elements as a weapon, a climate weapon, designed to weaken and destabilize an empire that had become too powerful? The idea of ancient climate manipulation is still a fringe theory, but it raises an intriguing question about the lengths to which human beings, or perhaps those with access to secret and ancient knowledge, could go to influence the course of history. What if the fall of Rome was not just the result of military defeat, political corruption, and social upheaval, but also the product of a much larger and more complex strategy, one that involved controlling the very weather itself? While there is no direct evidence to suggest that climate weaponry existed in the ancient world, the sheer scale and rapidity of the cooling during Rome's decline remain one of history's most perplexing mysteries. It is a chilling thought that the collapse of one of the greatest civilizations might have been hastened not just by human conflict or natural disaster, but by the manipulation of the environment itself, a weapon too advanced for the ancient world, or perhaps too terrible for modern minds to fully comprehend. Could the forces that brought down the Roman Empire have been more than just human? Could they have been elemental? And if so, could such a weapon exist today? The gods who abandoned the empire. The Roman Empire was built on steel, discipline, and conquest, but also on faith. Its people worshipped a vast pantheon of gods, seeking their favor in war, prosperity in trade, and guidance in times of crisis. Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, and countless others stood as divine guardians over Rome, their temples towering over the Forum, their names invoked in ceremonies before every battle, every harvest, every decision of state. But as the empire crumbled, something strange happened, something terrifying. The gods went silent. For centuries, the oracles had spoken with certainty, their cryptic messages shaping the course of emperors and generals alike. But in the last days of Rome, their voices faded. Temples stood empty. Sacrifices brought no omens. The augurs, who once read the future in the flight of birds, saw only chaos. The Sibylline books, the sacred texts, consulted in times of dire need, were lost to history. Their last recorded prophecies so troubling that some whisper they were destroyed on purpose. And even more chilling, many of the empire's high priests and mystics simply disappeared, as if they had seen something coming that no one else had. Had the gods abandoned Rome, or had something even darker taken their place? Some historians argue that the decline of the old gods coincided with the rise of Christianity, as the empire's religious identity shifted away from the polytheistic traditions that had sustained it for centuries. But could there be more to the story? There are ancient writings, long dismissed as a legend, that suggest something else, something more sinister. They speak of a great severing, a moment when the divine forces that once protected Rome withdrew their power, leaving the empire exposed. One chilling account comes from the historian Zosimus, writing in the early 6th century. He describes how Emperor Julian, known as the apostate, for his attempt to restore pagan traditions, became convinced that Rome had fallen out of favor with its gods. According to his writings, Julian sought out the last remaining pagan oracles, desperate for guidance. What he found was disturbing. These once mighty seers, who had shaped Rome's destiny for generations, were reduced to madness. Their visions were fragmented, their words incoherent. One priest, as legend has it, spoke only one phrase before vanishing forever. "The gates are broken, they will not return." But what gates? What had been broken? There are theories, wild ones, but theories nonetheless, that Rome's power was always tied to something greater than human ambition. Some believe the city itself was built on an ancient ley line, a place of immense energy that connected the earthly realm to the divine. The early kings of Rome, the first emperors, and the high priests knew this secret and harnessed it. They constructed temples in precise locations, performed rituals that reinforced this connection, and kept the gods appeased with blood and fire. But what if something changed? What if, over time, the rituals were forgotten, the alignments disturbed? The empire expanded beyond its means, diluting its spiritual core. Perhaps the gods, seeing their once loyal subjects neglect their duties, simply left. Or worse, perhaps they were forced out by something even more powerful. Some ancient texts, largely ignored by mainstream scholars, speak of a dark force that rose as the gods withdrew. The so-called cult of the empty sky, a shadowy sect that appeared in the final centuries of Rome, claimed that the old gods had been expelled, not abandoned. According to their doctrine, a new force had taken control of the heavens, one that did not speak, did not guide, but simply watched. Who or what was it? Could this explain why the empire, once blessed with victory after victory, suddenly seemed cursed? Why emperors were assassinated in rapid succession? Why plagues and disasters struck with unprecedented force? Why Rome itself, once the seat of power for the known world, fell into chaos? The final days of the Western Roman Empire were marked by strange and unsettling omens. A blood-red moon hung in the sky for 3 nights before the sack of Rome in 410 AD. A great fireball was recorded streaking across the heavens just before the assassination of Valentinian III. A chilling account from a Roman soldier, found in a fragmented manuscript, tells of a vision he saw on the night before the empire fell. The statues in the Forum wept. The temples, once so bright, seemed shrouded in shadow. And in the sky, where once our gods had reigned, there was nothing but the vast, empty dark. Was this simply the natural unraveling of an empire stretched too thin? Or was there something more at work, something supernatural? One thing is certain. When the Visigoths entered Rome, there were no gods to protect it. The great statues stood silent as the city burned. The temples, once filled with offerings, lay desecrated. The last rites had been given, and Rome, abandoned by its gods, fell. Who paid for the fall of the empire? The fall of Rome was not a single moment, not a single battle, not even a single catastrophe. It was a slow, painful unraveling, like a great beast bleeding out over centuries. The Visigoths sacked the city. The Vandals plundered its wealth, and the emperors fell one by one. But the true question remains: who benefited from Rome's demise? The legacy of the fallen empire Rome died, but its influence did not. Its symbols appear everywhere, even today. The eagle, once the mark of the Roman legions, would later fly over the banners of the Holy Roman Empire, Napoleon's armies, and the United States. The Latin language, once spoken in the Senate, became the foundation of law, science, and religion for centuries to come. Even the structure of modern governance, republics, senates, centralized power, are echoes of what Rome once was. And so the question lingers: was Rome truly destroyed, or was it simply rebranded? Maybe the empire never really fell. Maybe it just changed its name, its methods, its rulers. Maybe those who paid for its destruction were the same ones who built the world that came after it. And maybe, just maybe, Rome is still here. We just don't see it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share this video on social media. Stay tuned for more thrilling and mysterious stories. See you next time. Historians tell us that the fall of the empire led to the so-called Dark Ages, a time of chaos and decline. But was it really darkness, or was it merely the birth of a new order, one that had been waiting in the shadows for centuries? There are theories, whispers in old manuscripts, hints in forgotten texts that suggest the empire's fall was not an accident, that it was orchestrated, funded, even purchased by those who sought to shape the future in ways unseen, but who had the power, the patience, and the resources to bring an empire to its knees. The gold that disappeared. In the final years of Rome, something strange was happening in its economy. Gold, the lifeblood of the empire, was vanishing. It was not being spent on grand projects nor hoarded in imperial treasuries. It simply disappeared. By the time the Western Empire collapsed in 476 AD, Rome was nearly bankrupt, its once golden coins now little more than worthless metal discs. Where did the wealth of Rome go? Some claim that it was hidden away by the patricians, the last great families of Rome, who saw the writing on the wall long before the final collapse. These aristocrats, the same ones who had funded legions and built temples for generations, quietly moved their fortunes elsewhere. But where? Some say to the east, where Byzantium flourished for another 1,000 years. Others believe it was funneled into secret societies that would later emerge under different names: the merchant guilds of Venice, the banking houses of Florence, and the mysterious orders that would rise in medieval Europe. And then there is an even more unsettling theory that Rome's wealth was not lost, but taken. The silent rise of the new powers. In the wake of Rome's fall, new players emerged. The Vatican grew in influence, its power stretching far beyond the walls of a single city. The barbarian kings, once seen as uncivilized warriors, quickly adapted to the Roman way, taking its laws, its symbols, its legacy, and making them their own. And then there were the secretive groups that seemed to rise just as Rome fell, orders that had no clear origins, no clear purpose, yet wielded incredible influence over the new world that was taking shape. The Knights of the Temple, who centuries later would claim to hold ancient knowledge buried beneath Jerusalem. The freemen of the North, whose wealth and trade routes would shape medieval Europe. The shadowy figures behind the first great banking networks who dealt not in swords and armies, but in debt and power. Could it be that Rome never truly fell? That instead its essence, its wealth, its knowledge, its control, was merely transferred into new hands? A grand design? One of the most bizarre theories comes from a controversial manuscript found in the Vatican archives known as the Codex of the Seven Hills. It speaks of a secret council convened before Rome's fall, where the most powerful men of the empire debated the future, not how to save Rome, but how to let it die on their terms. The document suggests that the empire had become too unwieldy, too fragile. A controlled collapse was needed, one that would erase the past while securing the future for a chosen few. The plan, if it existed, was simple. Ensure that Rome's enemies, Goths, Huns, Vandals, would take the blame. Move wealth and power into smaller, more controllable entities. Rewrite history to make the empire seem like a lost world, rather than a system that had merely changed form. If true, this would mean that the fall of Rome was not an accident, not an inevitability, but a carefully executed transition. A transition to what? To the world that followed, the world of monarchies, of banking families, of hidden rulers shaping history from behind the throne instead of sitting on it.